All right, boys and girls. Shockingly, we're back for a third episode. Uh, yeah, I'm just as surprised as you. Hopefully, you're getting something out of these. I'm going to continue to add a little bit of the Department of Energy's human performance into these videos to hopefully help you see how it integrates with the world of safety professionals. So, this episode, again, episode three of the No Safety Guys Allowed podcast, is centers around the sinking of the El Faro. Means lighthouse in Spanish, as your word of the day. But it's really an interesting event, especially when you look through it, much like the last Damascus incident that we talked about in episode two. But when you look at this one under the auspices of human performance and organizational performance, it's uh, it's interesting. Well, at least it is to me. So the event itself, the sinking of the FRO, happened not that long ago. So this happened October 1st, 2015. So um, we're just over 5 years from the event. The crazy thing is not only did the sinking uh, first and foremost unfortunately result in the death of all 33 members aboard the ship, but the investigation following the incident resulted in more changes to the maritime industry, the most changes to the maritime industry laws since the Titanic. So this really had a huge ripple effect on the the industry. This yeah, it was flipping crazy. So, um, but at the end of the day, so again, Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, Tom whoever the hell you are, Tom Hanks was not aboard. So oddly enough, we have a traveling incident, and Tom Hanks isn't a part of it. So we don't have to worry about that one at least. But this is the El Faro. This is how it looks. You can see it's a shipping cargo container vessel, stacks with all the cargo containers. Oddly enough, this one on this trip, so the boat typically runs from Jacksonville, Florida, straight down to San Juan, Puerto Rico. There, back, there, back, there, back. This one had 391 containers on board. It had 294 tractor trailers and cars. Um, it was about 430 miles south east of Miami in some substantially deep water when it actually went down. Um, Experienced captain, sailed in Alaska. God knew what he was doing by all accounts. So the question comes in is how does an experienced captain in 2015, with all of the technology and things that we have around us today and in 2015, how does the captain and all of his officers and everybody aboard drive the ship into a category 3 hurricane and ultimately sink and die in the incident itself? And so here's the before, and unfortunately here's the after. It's like 15,000 feet of water. It took a while for the wreckage to be found. um, these ships carry much similar to aircraft. They have like a black box, very small, and they actually were able to find it, get the last recordings from the actual helm of the ship, and what it what it tells us is really interesting when you get into the audio dialogue that was recorded, and we'll talk more about that as we go through it. But here's the wreckage, and no bodies were ever recovered, unfortunately. Um, yeah, again, 33 people lost their lives in this event. So here's the Faro's normal path, right? This is where it goes. Like I said, Jacksonville, straight shot down to San Juan, back, forth, back, forth. What you see is Hurricane Joaquin's position as it moves right into that line. So again, how in the Sam Blue Hill, with all of the things available to us today from in the meteorology world. Look, I live in South Louisiana. From June 1st through November, we all become meteorologists. It's hurricane season. And so if I have access to this stuff, surely this guy's got to have access. These crew members, this company has to have access to this stuff. So how the hell does he unknowingly, big word, sail the ship into a Category 3 flipping hurricane? So, might be a little busy on the screen, but the captain had two options, right? Leaving San Juan, Puerto Rico, leaving Jacksonville. Joaquin isn't even a hurricane yet, and its track is really all over the place. You may have heard of the term spaghetti models. Well, this one, they didn't know where the hell it was going to go. Meteorologists didn't have a clue. It was a tropical storm. And so you can see the green line is the captain's normal path. He had another option to go in somewhat protected waters through the old Bahama path, if you will, to really shield himself from the weather. But looking at the information he had when he left port, the hurricane or the tropical storm at that point was predicted to move north. So he thought he could and much slower as well, he thought he could take this 40-year-old vessel, which was built like a muscle car. It was actually really fast, and simply outrun it. And he would, based on the data he was looking at, wouldn't be an issue. Not a problem. Let's go. The red line is the actual path it took. You can see he veered off of the normal path, but still ended up damn near in the eye of the hurricane, Category 3 storm. So the Department of Energy's guide introduces a term for us called latent conditions. And this is the wondrous governmental definition: an undetected situation or circumstance created by past latent errors that are embedded in the organization or production system, lying dormant for periods of time, doing no apparent harm. So it's something that's always been there. It's there. It was there from the design or from some organizational rule back in the day or what have you, but it is there. And it doesn't do a damn thing to us until we trigger it. And we talk about anytime, not every article, but the majority of articles focus on the captain and the captain's decision and how egotistical this man must be to put the other 32 people of his crew in danger, driving into this monster of a storm. But if you, again, the beauty of the black box gives us the dialogue in the from the ship, and it shows you that couldn't be further from the truth. So when we talk about latent conditions, we have to bring in human fallibility. We talked in the last episode about error traps and how they impact our behaviors. But if we know that humans are fallible, and as it says on the screen, we're vulnerable to external conditions. So when you look at, if we're susceptible to errors, so our susceptibility to error is augmented when people work with complex systems. It's an old chip, but it's still a pretty complex system um, that have concealed weaknesses, or as we just identified them, latent conditions that make it easier to provoke error or somewhat weaken the controls that we've put in place to protect us. And so we're gonna, on the surface, if I tell you a captain drives a ship into a category 3 storm and everybody dies, your first instinct is to immediately, this is like a Mark Wahlberg Perfect Storm movie. He's an idiot. But there's always, like Paul Harvey says, you got to get the rest of the story. So when we look at active errors versus latent conditions, so when we talk about active errors, we're typically talking about right now. So it's typically the workers, the guy, at the pointy end of the spear kind of thing. Latent conditions or latent errors, those are back in before. Again, they're lying dormant. So it's the managers, the engineers, the corporation itself. So what do they typically involve? Active errors involves equipment, whereas latent conditions, it's the values, the organization, the design, the beliefs, those things. We already talked about when do they occur. Active errors are immediate. Latent conditions are just that. Latent errors are just that. They lie dormant for some time and are typically not visible. But active errors are, which is again why it makes it so easy to blame the worker, to always come down on the worker rather than actually fixing the problem. So with all this being said, let's bring in the rest of the story, the latent conditions, right? So first and foremost, I told you that they had all these cars and tractor trailers on the Faro. Well, they were supposed to be bolted or strapped down, chained down in a certain manner, but instead they used a longer chain, which gave more leeway to, if one failed, they all failed as far as the anchoring of the cargo on the ship. So now you're in 30 to 40 foot seas, wind blowing 115 miles an hour, you're heaving left and right all over the place, and the sheer amount of weight from these vehicles down on deck 2, now that has caused that anchoring, that different type of anchoring, to come loose, and the chain reaction, no pun intended. So now you got all this weight, these cars sloshing back and forth and back and forth. But I guess we should back up, because I keep telling you that this captain ended up in the eye of a Category 3 storm. Well, how? So a lot of companies subscribe to these weather services, right? A lot of them are fantastic. And this company here was no different. It gave the weather in this beautiful graphical form. It was easy to read. The captains and people could make decisions based on this. Really, they can make decisions really quickly on this easy to read information. The other piece that they got very regularly was the regular National Hurricane Center's updates. So the issue becomes that the National Hurricane Center updates had to be plotted. You had to decipher and extrapolate the data out of the National Hurricane Center's report to really understand, to make it real. Whereas I got this graphical data and it's got everything I need right here on this piece of paper. The problem is they were using the data that went into the graphical form was 10, 12 hours old. but the timestamp on it was just when they ran the data. So you think you're looking at current data, but it's 12 hours old, and you're making decisions based on this data. Um, the So a latent condition is the captain's previous experience. He was actually fired from his previous job because he stopped a job. He shut a job down because of an inspection of the ship, and instead had the ship towed with tugboats to its destination. And they politely said, "Thank you for doing the right thing. You're fired." Um, so obviously and he takes that after being fired and starts with this company way down the totem pole and works his way back up to captain. So obviously there's some pressure there. We talk about air traps, but there's some pressure there for him to err on the side that keeps him employed based on his previous experience. Then also the captain has in the back of his mind future endeavors. This 40-year-old vessel is about to go back to Alaska. And the company's going to bring this state-of-the-art ship. They had brought two. He was not chosen as the captain of the first, so he's doing everything in his power to keep the spotlight on him, so that way when they choose the captain on this new state-of-the-art vessel, it's him. He gets the crown. The other piece, and we see this in military, we see this in companies, we see this all over the place, is this insanely hierarchical decision making. And this was the case here, so much so that the captain had actually contacted his supervisors to ask for permission to take the Bahama path on the way back, the protected path, to shield him from Hurricane Joaquin, and it was approved. And then on board, it's so crazy when you read the transcripts, and the captain, who is going off of this graphical weather report, thinks it's all rainbows and unicorns, and this is not going to be bad, whereas the second officer is actually plotting out the National Hurricanes Center's track and realizing that the shit's about to get real and they're driving into a hurricane. But yet the conversations never portray that. The second officer never really pushes that to the captain, like, Cap, like, we're not going where the hell you think we're going. Or better yet, the storm is not going where you think it's going. So their wires would cross the entire trip until it was too late. And that status of I'm the captain, rule number one, the captain's always right. Rule number two, if the captain's wrong, see rule number one, comes into play because nobody wants to challenge his way of thinking. There was at one point where the second officer, suggests an alternate route, and the captain says, again, based on his data, his wrong or old data, he says, nah, we good. Let's just keep going. And okay. She just goes along with it. And again, please understand, I'm not trying to put fault on these humans aboard the ship. This is how shit happens, unfortunately. And if you look at, latent conditions, we talked about design. So the fire main system, the fire water system on the vessel, the pump itself was protected. It was shielded in case cargo shifted around. It had barriers around it, but the piping didn't. And so the captain, unbeknownst to him, didn't realize that when the cars and trucks got loose, that they actually broke the main water main that feeds the firewater system, which is just pulling straight out of the sea. And it was below the water level, so it was just a coming. And And we'll talk about that and the lube oil design and how it factored into this case. And because what happens is when the captain first recognizes or is told that, look, Cap, we taking on water, there's cars floating around, like shit's getting real. They originally think it's coming from these openings in the deck, these scuttles in the deck, that they had closed down. But as you can see, the openings in the second deck, the waves, I mean, these are 30, 40-foot waves. Yeah, this is getting wet. And so the water was pouring in. So the captain is realizing that, well, so he sends somebody down to check on the scuttle, and they can't close it because the ship is listing. Again, because there's 115-mile-an-hour winds pushing on it. You can see here. So they can't get to the scuttle to close it. They have this huge starboard list. So the captain makes a decision along with his crew to turn the boat completely around. So I'm going to turn the boat completely around, get the wind blowing on the port side, shift me the other way, which will pull the water away from the scuttle. We'll close it. We're no longer taking on water. Life's good. So this was completely in vain because they had no idea that there was a larger hole that was just pouring water in below it from the fire main that we talked about. But here comes the lube oil system. So now we've shifted from the starboard list to a port list. Again, he and his crew, based on the data they had, this made sense. But unfortunately, the lube oil system was built in a way that if the boat listed more than 15 degrees to the port side, the lube oil couldn't pick up and circulate in the engine, and it shut down on a regular, low oil that every engine has. And so his action, his decision to correct the water inflow resulted in the ship losing oil pressure, the whole plant going down, and now you're a huge container ship with no propulsion in the middle of a Category 3 storm, 115-mile-an-hour winds, 30 to 40-foot seas, and the pucker factor just went through the roof. And so I go back to the hierarchical, got a little tongue twisted there, decision-making process. In the transcripts, you can hear the captain call his boss and basically say, hey, just want to let you know that, yeah, we had a scuttle pop open and we had some water, pretty good list, but, I'm just calling just to let you know. He hangs up the phone because he got the voicemail of his boss. Then he calls the company's emergency operator where he wants to speak to a QI, a qualified individual. And the tone is much different. It's real. It's an emergency. He says this is a maritime emergency. So they put him through to a QI, who happens to be the same guy that he left the message for, and his tone changes again. Yeah, we're good. We have, secured the water source that came in, but it's got a lot of water, and it shut down the main engine. And look, I just wanted to let you know that I'm about to push the button. Calm and collective. So he's just letting them know that, look, I'm about to push the general alarm. We're mustering. We're breaking camp. I don't know where you could break camp to in 30 to 40-foot seas, but they're done. They've done all they can in his mind. And so what's crazy is when you read the transcripts, the captain talking to his boss is basically like, yeah, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Like, hey, dude, I want to let you know so that way you don't find out from the Coast Guard. So I told you first, giving you, this courtesy notification. The whole while, is going to hell in a handbasket out there. And we see this with incidents. People want to sugarcoat things instead of telling it like it is. Sometimes you got to call a baby ugly, and a lot of times, myself included, we're scared to tell somebody their baby's ugly. But when you're dealing with this kind of life and death shit, the baby's ugly. So all these things come into play when we look at what caused this incident. It wasn't just the captain's, I'm driving through this, the ship and we can take it. It was the drive of not wanting to add the extra time to go down to the Bahama Channel, and the perception that that delay in arrival in San Juan may or may not bring upon him when it comes time to him either being promoted to the new vessel or maintaining his job. And then we talked about the design of the ship. The captain had no idea that the lube oil system was designed like such. There's no way. And so what we ultimately see is these 33 individuals lose their lives in something so completely preventable, but the active errors of the captain, his decisions based on the data he had, so his decisions at the time, his active errors, which triggered those latent errors, those latent conditions that we went through, that long list, the Paul Harvey version of the story, ultimately led to the demise and the death of these 33 individuals. And like I said, the investigation went as far as it made more changes to the maritime industry, the most changes since the Titanic. I mean, that's saying something, but yet we don't really talk about these things. When a plane crashes, it's all over the news. It's hundreds, 250 people. You can see the destruction. This was 500 miles out to sea with 33 people. Didn't really make a whole lot of news, unfortunately. But the learnings are as much here, if not more, than they are from some of these aviation incidents that we talked about. So again, when we as safety professionals, this is what we look for. We don't focus in on the active error. We look for those latent conditions. We look for the crappy lube oil design. This is what we get paid to do, not to be the safety guy. Again, looking, as the Department of Energy talks about them, those latent conditions. And I challenge you to look for those. A little bit more information. There's the 50-minute documentary on the actual sinking on the Smithsonian channel. I'll put that link on the site. And then it's a long read, but Vanity Fair actually did a fantastic article that outlines a lot of this stuff. And as you can see from the screen, my spelling is atrocious. There's an error that really doesn't matter. So anyway, so with that said, again, contact us, hit us up on Facebook, whatever you want to do. Tell us how stupid we are, how we're wasting your time. But whatever the hell you do, don't be a safety guy. Until next time.